one of the most fundamental papers we have in the field, which I use so much the pages for, and he sent me a new one.
And I'm here to tell you that I have a real appreciation for the Norbert Wiener Center and for Norbert Wiener. We do all this mentoring, you know. Everybody's supposed to be mentoring other people. You know who my mentor was? Norbert Wiener. Never met him. Well, but that's reasonable. He wrote these wonderful books. Many wonderful books, and you could read. I knew much more about Norbert Wiener than I knew about my advisor, who I saw on a daily basis. I learned a lot from Norbert Wiener. For example, I learned all about control theory, feedback control, with time delays. You know how I learned about this? He wrote a science fiction book about theft of intellectual property occurring around the year 1900. And it was about designing ships and the steering of ships. And so they'd have feedback control. They'd want to go in a certain direction, and if they're going in this direction, it would automatically turn. And because of the time delays, it might turn too far. If it turned too quickly, then it'll recover and come back, and then come back, and then come back, and then roll over. And ships did roll over due to inadequate feedback control, too long time delays. I learned this in high school. No equation. I couldn't make any sense of his cybernetics, which was full of equations and so on, or his other books. But many ideas that he introduced. I learned about the Maxwell demon, you know, thermodynamics in high school from reading Norbert Wiener's stuff. He has a box and he's got a wall, a little door in between, and the Maxwell demon opens the door when a fast atom was going that way or when a slow one is going that way. Otherwise he closes it. And heats up on one side and it cools down the other side at no cost. And so this is what Maxwell proposed. And, a lot of wonderful ideas. And I probably read half a dozen of his books in high school. That may be an exaggeration. But, so he was my mentor. And kind of crazy guy. But still, I learned a lot from him. So having a Norbert Wiener Center here is a totally different affair, and it brings a lot of applications of staff to the math department. I think that's wonderful. So I'm going to, by the way, my advisor's 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 advisor was Norbert Wiener. So I'm going to turn this over to John Benedetto, and who's done a great job, I think, with the Norbert Wiener Center.
Thank you, Jim. I actually invite Jim to give the opening remarks, not only because he's my boss, but it's a free, entertaining talk. And he gets to tell the fact that he's a grandchild of Norbert Wiener. I appreciate that. So this is the Norbert Wiener Center for Harmonic Analysis and Applications. This is the sales pitch. In just about 5 minutes, you're going to hear a very exciting talk by Gary Cipra, but please sit for the sales pitch. Just to let you know what we are about, we are a part of the Department of Mathematics. That was by our choice. And we have 4 categories. We believe we are a state-of-the-art research center, and I think we've proven it in many ways. We have a professional master's degree in the mathematics of advanced industrial technology, MATE. When I go on the road to advertise, I say, let's mate. We are just beginning with the business school, a financial mathematics program. They say you should strike when the iron is hot. Perhaps it's just tepid right now. But I'm actually very optimistic that we're going to have a very successful venture with them. And we're an international center. I can't go into details about that right now, but please look at our website. You'll see the extent to which I mean we are an international center.
What, you heard of us in Canada?
maybe address it more lengthily and cut into Barry's talk. What is our mission? Well, our mission is to advance research in mathematical engineering in the 21st century, analogous to mathematical physics of the 20th century. Mathematics departments of our era and of the previous generations have large, significant, and important components of partial differential equations and numerical analysis based on 19th century physics. We're experiencing the golden age of engineering in the engineering community, and our goal is to jump the gun, as they say, get involved quickly in mathematics departments by offering a program in mathematics departments analogous to the golden age of mathematical engineering. And some of the projects we've been involved with, I won't read the whole litany there, but our research and funded projects are involved all of these topics that are listed here. And they're very current, very important research areas. And we want to teach the mathematics of advanced industrial technology in an accessible and applicable manner. Come on, baby. Personnel, besides myself, we're heavy on directors, but these two guys do an inordinate amount of the work. Wojtek Shire and Chris Shaw. And so these two guys, they are our scientific development officers. One of their roles is to seek research opportunities from industry and government. And we are blessed with a remarkable group of faculty members. And all of these people, in some sense, are interchangeable. It's an unbelievably talented group of people. This year, we have as our postdoc Martinella. We frequently have one or two postdocs. And we have additional faculty from government, industry, and universities. This is a wonderful area geographically. The expertise in the subjects that we are teaching is of the first rank in these labs. And I'm looking right now, I see Greg Coxon, there are a number of others, David Colonna, who are our instructors, who are just outstanding people. And our webmaster is Alfredo Navasfidel. So just a little bit about the state-of-the-art research center. As a research center, we run the gamut from undergraduate research all the way down or up, depending how you look, to the highest research efforts at the frontiers that are out there. And at the undergraduate level, we have the Daniel Sweet Undergraduate Research Fellowship. He was one of our great instructors who passed away in an untimely way a number of years ago. And we dedicated this fellowship to worthy, talented undergraduates. And our base is theoretical and applicable harmonic analysis, and we support technologies of the 21st century. This is just a brag sheet about some of our grants that we have right now. I guess I won't read the litany, but things are going very well. And then as far as our master's program goes, we have a 30-credit master's degree program aimed at working professionals. We have besides the master's, we offer certificates in computational harmonic analysis, also one in MATE, and also radar signal processing. And our instructors that I mentioned come from academia and industry and our own faculty. We really have tried to get, and we have gotten some of the most talented people in the area as our instructors. Our facilities, of course, you've seen or you're going to party in shortly, on the second floor, our Norbert Wiener Center suite, and we use this room for one of our classrooms as well as other rooms here. But we also have another location, which Dr. Easley has made accessible to us in Northern Virginia. It's the WJLA building, and we have our classes in Northern Virginia also. As I mentioned, we've just begun this financial math program, and it will launch in the fall of 2010. We have very high expectations for it, as does the business school. We will be working in concert with them. So that business school there is called the R.H. Smith School of Business, and we're going to begin in 2010. And I must say, these are people from the business school, the last three. Peter Carr was our featured speaker in this slot last year. And for those of you who were here, you may remember he said there's going to be a financial crisis in this country very soon. So I'm not sure what Barry's going to say at the top of that. But we are expecting a lot from Barry tonight. And then finally, as an international center, I want to say that we run conferences, not only this one, but others. We have many, many collaborations worldwide, not only in Canada, although we do have some in Canada. Our website is really truly an international news center about what's going on in our particular area. We have a book series in concert with Turquoise Springer, the Norbert Wiener Center book series, and which is a very successful series. And Turquoise was represented here this year. They have a very nice display in the lounge area. I hope it's closed for the evening, I guess now, but I hope those of you who are here tomorrow really see the selection. And Turquoise Springer is one of the outstanding, if not the most outstanding, science and math publisher in the world today. And our advisory boards, there are local folks here, including our esteemed chair, but I'd like to point out that the non-local folks are truly major players. Koifman is a National Academy of Sciences and a Presidential Medal of Science winner. Ingrid Overshees, National Academy of Sciences, and a MacArthur Genius. And of course, Delomo and Saraki are part of my brain trust. I don't know what I would do without them, but we're very, very fortunate to have is Harry Schmidt, who's a Raytheon Fellow, and Gary Jason, who's a MITRE Fellow, Joseph Lawrence from Dr. Lawrence from ONR, and Francis Sullivan, who heads one of the largest computer labs in the world over here at Wooten. There's my hero. He looks an awful lot like his great grandson looks a little bit like him, I'd say. Now, before I turn the floor over to Barry, we do have a Society of Fellows in the Norbert Wiener Center. Really, people who have got this thing off the ground. In some sense, it hasn't been easy. It has certainly been very, very exciting. And this year, I'd like to make an award to someone that I don't know how we would have. In fact, I couldn't imagine doing it without him even now, but we've managed to struggle along since he left us. But he's here tonight, and it's Johnny Constantine. Johnny, I'd like to truly an understatement. Johnny, thank you very much. You should. I think I would have heard about it if I didn't. Yes, we should have this. Let's do that. Okay, so moving right along, our keynote speaker tonight is an old friend, and he came here from Caltech, graduated from Caltech. He was one of the most brilliant graduate students we've ever had here. He studied number theory. He wrote an outstanding PhD thesis, went on as a Moore instructor, which is one of the most prestigious postdoctoral positions in the land at MIT. I thought at the time this was a research career that should be emulated by anyone in the world. Then he made a fantastic and interesting choice, which I'm not sure if it's the correct choice. I mean, he's very smart mathematically, but he went on to become one of the great mathematical expositors of our time. Really of our time, because he's been doing this now for many years, and he's had tremendous impact in affecting for the better the fate of mathematics amongst the general population, and for all of us who are professionals who want to learn something in one of the fields. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Barry Cipra.
First order, does anybody know how to switch to this? I'm going to try it. See what happens. Yeah.
Try that one.
Yeah, that one. Hey, good. All right. And hopefully that will disappear in just a moment. Yeah, no, thank you very, very much. A wonderful introduction. It's just a great pleasure, great honor to has to stand between a large group of people and dinner in about 40 minutes. In fact, that clock shouldn't be behind me. John, you should be holding it. Right? Okay. So, I will do my best to move things along. As John explained, I work now as a freelance mathematics writer. I do reporting on things going on in the mathematical sciences. Started out for many years, did a lot of the math reporting for Science magazine that many of you are familiar with. This is the latest issue that has a two-page spread of meeting briefings from the joint meetings last month that I did. And I've worked for the American Mathematical Society, and I do a lot of writing for Science News, and kind of whoever will pay me. And over the course of time, I've thought about things about what makes a good math story, and more what makes a math story good, which usually is getting an editor to fix up the writing. So I'd like to go through and give a few snippets. There's not going to be anything technical or deep because all that stuff is way in my past now, but hopefully it'll be sort of fun. First things first. I'd really like to express my appreciation to John, not just for inviting me here, but really for his friendship over the years. He was one of the people I met early on. I was not his student. He had standards. He always had standards. But I took courses from him and really learned a lot about, not only about harmonic analysis, but about what it is to be a mathematician. And so I really appreciate that. I was, as he said, a grad student here back, I came in '74, so this goes back about 35 years. And I always very much looked up to John, even then, as one of the old guys. Okay, just a few comments about what is journalism generally, and science journalism in particular. I've thought about this, and some years back I found a couple of quotes that really seem to nail it. The first is from Lord Northcliffe, who was the founder of British tabloid journalism. And he defined journalism as a profession whose business it is to explain to others what it personally does not understand. And I certainly find that to be the case in many ways. As much mathematics as I do or used to know, I'm constantly writing about things that I've never heard of, and have to kind of fake it or create the illusion of understanding in my readers. Another nice definition I've always liked comes from G.K. Chesterton. Said a journalist is a person who works harder than any other lazy person in the world. So this was just the right profession for me to go into. One of the fun things about being a freelance writer is I can take a day off or an afternoon off and kick back and read a novel or some poetry or the New Yorker or whatnot, and call it professional development. And I sort of enjoy finding instances of mathematics in literature and in poetry, and there are many of them, and going way far back, but increasingly there are serious poets who take interest in mathematics and the sciences generally. About 10 years ago, I was in a bookstore and came across a book called Kissing the Bread by Sandra Gilbert, which I picked up because it had a nice looking cover, and as is my wont, I often like to kind of glance through and see if there are any mathematical titles of poems. Sometimes unintentionally mathematical, other times explicitly. I didn't expect much from this book per se, but based on the cover and the title, but I thought I'd take a look. And there's actually a whole section of mathematical poems in this book, named after the title of one of the poems. So Sandra Gilbert's Kissing the Bread has a poem called When She Was Kissed by the Mathematician. And I'll just read the opening few lines. It's about a page and a half long. But the morning after the night she was kissed by the mathematician, she woke with a new intelligence. And I asked my wife if this were true. She said she did wise up, but so let me get back to the subject of what makes a good math story. And Can't really say for sure, but I think there are some ingredients. The short answer is good math, period. And fortunately, there's a lot of it, and so it's an easy job in many ways to do. A little bit longer, but still a little lighthearted. There are always aspects of, you can't go wrong with sex and violence. Controversy always is that the editors really like, and people like to read personalities and personality quirks. Anything about money seems to draw people in, and pretty pictures are generally a draw. It's actually generally hard to find something about sex and violence in mathematics, but it does kind of come in. There's a group out at the University of Washington that runs the Love Lab. There's a psychologist there. They've studied the mathematics of marriage. Psychologist John Gottman, who came with an interest in some background in mathematics, teamed up years ago with James Murray, who's a well-known applied mathematician who was wound up at the University of Washington. And kind of what they did was they studied marital harmony or disharmony as a discrete dynamical system. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail, but this was actually a real eye-opening experience and explained quite a bit about my wife and me. They looked at the interactions of husbands and wives, videotaping conversations going back and forth, and then they had their psychology grad students kind of numerically rate whether they were having a nice conversation or and how things were going. And they came up with this model, which the key to it are these influence functions that say, if I say one thing, then it influences the reply, or the tenor, the body language, or the rolling of the eyes, and things like this. The key, turned out for the mathematical analysis, was to have some nonlinearity in the influence function that sort of makes negative influences a little stronger than positive ones in general. They discovered quite a bit out of this, and they found that they did a divorce prediction study that turned out to be highly accurate. They took several hundred people, newlyweds, ran this study, and then out of the analysis, they simply made a prediction. How many of them, or which ones would be still married, I think 5 or 7 years down the road, and they just waited. And most of the false, or most of the errors were, I don't know if you call them false positives, or at any rate, they were marriages that they predicted divorce, but they were still hanging in there. They've more recently, and may have already done a lot of this, done some work on counseling strategies and really applying this to trying to keep marriages repaired. So there's your sex and violence. Some elements of controversy. Anything educational is going to be controversial. Things like, do power laws characterize the internet? You get great arguments out of this. So some of this may be beginning to be settled. For a while, there were great discussions about what counts as an acceptable proof. You may remember about 15 years ago, there was an article in Scientific American called The Death of Proof, which came out like a month before Andrew Wiles announced his initial proof of Fermat's last theorem. And anyway, the Horgan article was engendered. I got lots of flack for something I didn't write. More recently, Tom Hales, with his proof of the Kepler conjecture that made such extensive use of the computer, has gone back and created this thing called FlySpec, where he's really trying to use the computer to do an absolutely rigorous, from first principles, proof of his Kepler conjecture, and people have been doing other things like there's now a believably rigorous proof of, I'm sorry, I'm getting beyond what I know, so I'm going to start making stuff up. But anyway, people are talking about, what is the nature of proof, and especially with computers. For a while, at least, the Perelman-Poincaré stuff was somewhat controversial, or at least it was uncertain. That seems to have been, largely settled, although there are, of course, going to be holdouts, and as there should be. Personalities are wonderful. you know, we've got this old complaint. I used to all the time ask people, you know, why did you ever see a mathematician on the cover of Time or Newsweek? Okay, and I always used to say, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. But there are some true mathematical personalities that one might like to see on the cover of Time and Newsweek. That's, you know, the story of Andrew Wiles with his 10 years in the attic, which was really only 7, but by the time it gets to the public, juiced up to that. John Nash, when he won the Nobel Prize and The Beautiful Mind, the movie came out, people were quite fascinated with that. These two kind of combined in the Auburn play Proof that you know, won all kinds of awards and people were quite fascinated with. Again, then there's this current show Numbers. It's about, you know, a crime-solving mathematician and the personalities there. So there's quite a bit of public interest and mathematics sort of invading the general culture, pop culture in some regard, all based on quirky things. We're not even going to mention heritage. I don't think I've got it on there. A few things about money. You know, there is, of course, mathematical finance and how well that's going these days. Calculus and derivatives. But anything that ties into things that have made tons of money or influence things like public key cryptosystems is a good topic. Google, you know, with its connections with linear algebra and the page rank. The Abel Prize, you know, for a long time, you know, mathematicians, you know, that you can talk about the Fields Medal as being the equivalent of the Nobel Prize, but it's hard to, you know, get much notice of it because of the 2 orders of magnitude differential in the prize money. The Abel Prize is still, you know, scratching its way to general awareness and may never reach quite the level of the Nobel Prize, you know, because it's got a different name. But it's still, you know, $1 million is $1 million. And in fact, the Clay Math Institute $1 million prize problem, you know, stuff has really generated a fair amount of public interest and has crept into the TV show Numbers and so on. And of course, again, the Perelman-Poincaré connection with the Clay Institute. It's also been behind at least 4 books on the Riemann hypothesis, so it's generated, you know, quite a bit. So, you know, even if they never actually dole out any of the money, the fact that there's $1 million out there is sort of the people kind of find attractive, just the notion. And of course, there are pretty pictures, and we've all seen, you know, pictures. One of the lessons I learned really early on is the old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words, is really not correct. A picture is worth approximately 250 words. And by this I mean, when I write for science, a page of science is about 1,000 words, roughly. If I can put a picture on there, I only have to write 750 words. And I actually get paid not by the number of words, but by the number of pages or the columns. So there you go. Now, you know, we've all seen pretty pictures of fractals. There's the Mandelbrot set, of course. Fractals have also occurred in recent years in analysis of the Jackson Pollock drip paintings. There was work by the physicist Richard Taylor computing the Hausdorff dimension of Jackson Pollock's and then using that for authentication. And there was a very much publicized case a few years ago where they discovered a whole bunch of what looked like and were purported to be, you know, new Jackson Pollocks. Not new, he's been dead for a while, but they've been up in somebody's barn for decades. And they asked Taylor to take a look at them. Here's one of them. And the question was, could Hausdorff dimension somehow reveal that the one well-known one is certainly real? Is this new one fake? And this also brings in issues of controversy because, at least from the art history community, people don't like to, you know, be told one thing when they want to believe another. And as far as I know, this is still highly controversial. Taylor, I believe, concluded based on the Hausdorff dimension that that was a fake. but there are other people who say, no, 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 it's just he was, he was developing, experimenting with different dimensions. Yeah. More recently, in this two-page spread, just at the math meetings last month, there was a kind of a fascinating talk on fractal billiards and trying to figure out what it means to play billiards inside the Koch snowflake. Grad student Rob Niemeyer and Michelle Lapidus, his advisor, are looking at this. You can take the classic Fagnano orbit and then sort of iterate it out. But if you take other orbits, you can still get periodic orbits. But they do sort of weird things as as you grow the snowflake. So we have pictures, kind of like this, that they all start, I think, with this bottom thing, but then they take different bounces for a while after that. But those are nonetheless each one periodic, and they're actually trying to figure out what can you even mean by going to the final limit. Penrose tiles are another thing that I just like to show these. These are done by an artist, friend of mine, Pia Kracek, who paints, and I think this is an actual acrylic painting. She also works in computer graphics. This is actually the same Penrose tiling, just colored differently, and a couple of others by Taya, sort of a hypercubey thing. I don't know how she gets the blister effect. I believe that's a computer graphic, and something I have no idea what it is, but it just looks nice. And I've been trying to build an article around this. Okay. Origami is another great area for pretty pictures and actually very interesting mathematics. This guy Robert Lang is an applied physicist who trained as an applied physicist, who now, by and large, just does origami design. He's actually the world's leading origami designer, mainly because he came up with algorithmic and mathematical ways of designing the world's most unbelievable origami. And the origami community, with the advent of some mathematical analysis and computational capabilities, has gone far beyond the little flapping birds and hats, and creating, this is sort of nothing compared to what you're about to see. There was just a session at the AAAS meeting last week with Lang and Eric Demain, who many of you may know from MIT, and some other origami people, talking about the mathematics of origami. What Lang has done is he's come up with kind of a circle packing method he calls tree maker that enables you to take a stick figure drawing of anything you want to create and feed it through a computer that prints out the folding pattern. This is, well, I mean, the circle part isn't, yeah, it looks like a circle. It's actually a polygon. So this really is the folding pattern of mountain valley folds, if you know which is which, that creates that. Okay. And just a few others. You can get a nice elk or moose. You can get a praying mantis out of this sort of a circle packing type analysis. This is just the wonderful things that origami people are now doing, using mathematics and using some of the computational tools to be able to take an idea and then realize it on the flat paper. Then of course it takes a rather skilled paper folder to get this stuff to work. There's one now that's done with 16 squares. Everything else is one single square of paper. But this thing they had to use a few extra things. So great stuff. Let me give a few slightly more serious answers about what makes a good mathematics story. I think there are many things, but certainly great problems. I think important applications are given, and for this crowd, that's a no-brainer. And then pleasant surprises, just things you don't expect, always appeal to me. So just to run through a few great problems that have come up. Of course, there's Fermat's last theorem, which for many of the young people is just sort of old news. It was one of the most. It was kind of the one time in my life I got to call my editor and say, stop the presses. And we had to get this story in. It sort of broke on I think on a Tuesday early morning for me, and we tried to rush it in to as soon as we can. Again, Perelman and Poincaré was just a fabulous problem, and many aspects of it are great. Another one that I like to mention is some work on the complexity of the simplex method, and a couple of guys, the names slip my mind now. Once I write these things, I tend to forget them if I don't have it right in front of me. But it's well known that the simplex method, although it works well in practice, is theoretically bad, that it is susceptible to the combinatorial explosion of visiting every vertex in the 2 to the n simplex. But in the last 10 years, 5 to 10 years, a couple of guys have worked out a theory by which they can really explain why it is that the simplex method, seems always works. And so they have this wonderful theory. And of course, there are just endless more examples like that. Important applications. Okay, just the most cursory sample. I did a story I really liked several years ago on a kidney transplant donor matching algorithm. And the problem here is that when people need a kidney transplant, one way to get it from is a cadaver. Okay, you wait for somebody to run off the road into a tree, and then you get them to the hospital and you take it out of the corpse. But there aren't enough people having deadly accidents. There aren't enough people. Actually, there aren't enough people who sign the donor card. Is the real problem. But a preferable way, or one preferable way, is to drag in your brother and say, I'll take his. And you have to get your brother to agree with it. The problem there, of course, is that your brother and you may not be a match. However, they found over the years, and kidney specialists have often found that they have two patients come in, each with a prospective donor. The donors aren't matches for their friend or relative, but they're matches for the other patient. So patient A's donor is a good match for patient B, whose donor is a good match for patient A. And they've been doing this for years and years. They just have them all come in and they do the operations all at once, and they swap the kidneys, and everybody goes home, happy and hopefully healthy. Well, the kidney transplant centers have on occasion had cases where it's not just 2 pairs, it's 3 pairs, where patient A's donor is a good match for patient B, whose donor is a good match for patient C, whose donor is a good match for patient A. And then they get all 6 of them in. They have to do the operations all at once because somebody could back out after they get their and they have to allow that. You could always decline an operation until you're actually cut open. So they have been doing these triples. Well, an economist at Harvard and some of his colleagues looked at this in a very general setting of, look, we've got thousands of kidney patients on the transplant list, and many of them have their donors. You get this information, and why can't we, why just limit it to these pairwise or these little triangles? Let's look for really big cycles and get like 200 people in an operating room. So I mean, mathematically, you could conceivably do silly things like this, but they have seriously, looked at this and some of the and worked with kidney centers about setting this up and hopefully, identifying good cycles. The reason it's an economist doing this is they've had to look at it in terms of, perverse incentives to, in order to make sure you get into one of the cycles, you lie about what it is you want or what it is your donor has or things like that. And so a good part of the algorithm, or the analysis of the algorithm, was to prove or establish that it didn't create any perverse incentives of that type. So kind of a nice application.
They just did 6 this week.
I'm sorry?
They just did 6 this week.
Really?
Yes.
I hadn't. Wow. Thank you.
Well,
Where?
2 days ago. Watkins was the center place, but there were some other hospitals.
Okay.
It worked out pretty good.
Fantastic. Great. Well, I'm always behind the curve. Another important application that just came out of the math meetings last month and are in this 2-page spread is the mathematics of gerrymandering, the redistricting process, where incumbents or politicians get to decide which voters re-elect them. And the people at the session are looking at ways to approach the redistricting problem using good mathematical analyses and ideas to hopefully limit the mischief that politicians get into.
No fractal districts.
Yeah. Well, that was some more pretty pictures.
But then there are other mathematicians on the payroll of the politicians.
Oh yeah, oh absolutely, yes. It can be used for good or evil. That evil is a lot better paid. There was a wonderful workshop a few years ago at the IMA on film editing and restoration and using mathematics to do, this all comes out of image processing that I don't have to tell people in this crowd much about, but it certainly also gets to, and there's just endless things. Have to use microscopic print to get anywhere near a complete list. Just to give you a sense of what they're doing in film editing and restoration, there's just lots of valuable old film that's in terrible, terrible condition. And some of it is literally disintegrating. I was told that you go into some film vaults and there are these old canisters that are bulging and oozing the kind of dangerous chemicals. So just an example, this is a frame from the, what do you call it? Jean Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast, famous French movie. It's got scratches all over it, blurred, and all sorts of horrible things. They've been able, using mathematical analyses, to just take all that stuff out, and I can even get out the wording. So, in fact, in some ways, there are techniques that are so good that the movies don't look old anymore. And some people watching these things are disconcerted because it doesn't look like an old movie. Finally, let me kind of wrap up with pleasant surprises. It's great to find unexpected connections. That, of course, happens all the time in mathematics. Unexpected difficulties, where you think something ought to be simple because it's a simple sounding problem, like x to the n plus y to the n equals z to the n, and it turns out not to be so easy. And then unexpected solutions, where we all have come across things where something seemed to be awfully difficult, and then it suddenly has a simple solution, or there's something in the way it's solved that nobody would have dreamed. And then unexpected beauty, which we all are familiar with as a mathematical, well, beauty certainly, and places where you don't offhand anticipate it. Just to conclude, I'd like to give an example that I think combines all of these. It's one of my favorite stories from about 5 or 6 years ago. Now, it has to do with Venn diagrams. A new result about Venn diagrams, which was sort of a surprise in itself, because when I was told, hey, these guys are doing new work with Venn diagrams, I studied that in like the 7th grade. What can there possibly be new? But it actually turns out there are endless problems involving Venn diagrams and things you can do or things you can ask about them. Just to remind you what Venn diagrams are, we all remember the 2-set and the 3-set Venn diagram. The thing to realize for this particular story is these pictures have the property that they are rotationally symmetric. that they have a center point around which you can rotate by 180 for the one or 120 degrees for the other, and it lands back on itself. You've basically taken one circle, rotated it about, not the center of the circle, but about some other point, and gotten, you know, one other circle or two other circles. Well, a long time ago, somebody asked, are there symmetric Venn diagrams with more than 3 sets? Can you draw something with 4 sets as a Venn diagram and make it rotationally symmetric? You might actually think this goes way far, way, you might think John Venn would have asked this. It was actually first asked by David Henderson in 1963. He was an undergraduate at the time. He was taking a philosophy course, and they were studying some logic, and you know, they were looking at Venn diagrams, and he looked at it, and he wondered this question that, you know, could have been asked many years before, and he partially answered it, and wound up writing a paper in the American Mathematical Monthly, in which he said, in general, no, which could be the end of the story right there. In particular, whoops, I'm sorry, whoops. Did I skip a slide? Oh, shoot, I'm sorry, I somehow deleted a slide. So let me just go back to, sorry, Lord. Suppose you had a 4-set Venn diagram. I apologize, I was editing this for brevity, and I was taking stuff out, and I took too much stuff out. Now I'm spending more time explaining why something is missing. If you had a rotationally symmetric 4-set Venn diagram, then things would have to go, you know, in sets of 4, because whatever you have, you're going to rotate by 90 degrees, and you're going to get something different, and you rotate again, so on. So in particular, your pairwise intersections, okay, would have to come in groups of 4. But how many pairwise intersections of 4 sets are there? There are 6. Okay, and 4 does not divide 6. Okay. In general, if you have, in order to get a rotationally symmetric Venn diagram, you've got to have the number of sets divide the binomial coefficient for all the different combinations. And that only happens when n is prime. Okay. And this is an old reason, this is an old theorem of Leibniz, is who seems to get credit for it. God knows who actually discovered it. So the conclusion is that there are no symmetric Venn diagrams for composite numbers. Okay. There's a question that came up after all this was actually, I'm sort of responsible for the following, that after I reported on this, various people got interested in the subject and looked at it, and a couple guys looked at this proof, and they asked, is that really a completely valid proof? And of course the answer was no. Stan Wagon and Peter Webb a few years ago realized there was kind of a gap in the logic, and I'm not going to explain, you know, how they came across it or what it all means, but they realized that it needed to be filled, and they wrote a paper that appeared in the Monthly, I think last year, certainly in the last couple of years. They supplied a missing lemma, which said if you have a simple closed curve that's invariant under a rotation about some point O, that point has to be inside the curve. Which seems like an odd, you know, it's hard to at first understand what it says, and it's hard to believe that it can't, you know, that there's anything to be proved, but there really is, and for one thing, you know, there's the Jordan curve theorem lying behind this, and the proof that Wagon and Webb give is, there's a little bit of subtlety. Nonetheless, okay, the conclusion still does stand, that the composite numbers are ruled out, but this does leave the question about prime numbers. And in Henderson's original paper, he not only gave an incomplete proof for composite numbers, he supplied some examples of 5-set Venn diagrams using some polygons. But people, you know, started continuing to look at it. With 5, actually anything above 3, you can't draw a Venn diagram with circles. You've got to use more complicated curves. You can do a 5-set diagram with ellipses. And here's what one of them looks like. Just a really nice little picture. You've got one ellipse, the center in that black region, I initially thought was somewhere, I assumed it was one of the foci, or at least on the major axis. It turns out it's not, and for various reasons cannot be. There's a little asymmetry to that propeller, but that's what this is the sort of thing you get. So the next went to 7. And it took a while, actually, for people to really take the subject quite seriously. But about 12 years later, Branko Grunbaum, geometer at the University of Washington, I think even then, said at present it seems likely that no such diagram exists. Okay? And he was really saying it works for 2 and 3 and 5 because they're small numbers, but 7 and above, no, they just don't have them. And people sort of asked him, well, why? And, well, why do you think that? And he said, well, because I looked real hard to find them, and I couldn't. The problem is that to search for these things, you get this combinatorial explosion again of there's so many different ways you could conceivably arrange how the sets intersect that it's just too big a search space to go through seemingly by hand or much less or in any kind of brute force fashion. Well, they finally kind of asked Grunbaum, well, come on, can you prove it? And he said, well, sure, yeah, I'll prove it. Took another 17 years. Grunbaum and some others, in the course of proving there were none, found that they had a little trouble proving that because there are some. And there is one. The green curve is, one of the sets, and the other ones are just the rotated copies. And you can get some sense of why it took a while to find. Okay. Well, once that happened, you go to 11, and as soon as you got 7, then it's clear. In fact, it's approved that they happen. But you'd really like to find them and nail it down. A few years go by, and Grunbaum just throws up his hands and writes the sheer size of the problem, puts it beyond the reach of the available approaches. And that's actually probably a correct statement. But almost immediately, Peter Hamburger came up with a new approach. An approach he called doodles and doilies, and that enabled him to narrow the search or focus what he would look at as possibilities for rotationally symmetric 11-set diagrams or prime diagrams in general. And he went back and did 5 and 7 to show that by drawing doodles, he could create doilies. And then he tackled 11 and succeeded. Okay? Almost immediately after Grunbaum said, we're not going to find them with what we know. Just have to know something new. And this is what he found. Okay? That's the curve. Okay? And that, again, is it filled in. The curve, there it is, half filled in. That's just the pattern of intersections with the other 10 copies. So there are, what is it? Well, it's 1,024 regions in there. Yeah, okay. So I should say these diagrams were hand drawn by his wife, Edith Heff, who's an artist, and she used some Xeroxing to get the symmetry, but all the coloring was done with colored pencil. In fact, they had an art exhibit of these. I seem to have lost a couple other things. Once they found one, they found a bunch, and there's the curve for this one. There it is, half filled in. I actually own a copy of that, and it's almost that big. I'm hoping I didn't delete the slide that shows the art exhibit and the size of these things. And I think one more, you can see almost some fractal-esque patterns going on here, and it half filled in. I do have a picture from an exhibition, so you can get some sense of the scope. That was at a coffee house near the university where Hamburger taught. 13. Hamburger's method, okay, applies to any prime, but it still leaves a combinatorial search that he was able that was small enough for him to do 11, but by the time you get 4 times as many curves with 2 to the 13th kinds of combinations, it was still elusive. So it needed yet another idea, a couple of ideas. Chip Killian, who was an undergraduate himself at the time, a student of Carla Savage in North Carolina, and Jerry Griggs in South Carolina, decided to tackle n equals 13. Basically, Griggs looked at Hamburger's approach, had one more idea for refining or limiting what you look at, thought that they might be able to apply that to 13, suggested to Savage that they look at it. She thought it would be a good way to keep Killian off the streets at night. Turned it over to him, said, look at this, look at Hamburger's work, look at what Griggs, what Jerry has suggested, and see if you can do 13. Killian went off. She figured he's gone for the rest of the semester, if not the year. So he came back 2 weeks later with a proof for all primes. Killian had one final idea for trying something, okay, that narrowed the search all the way down to something that worked. And oddly enough, I'm told it was the simplest thing you could possibly think to do, just nobody had thought to do it. It had to do with something called block codes. That's as much as I do know about it. This is unfortunate. It cuts short a potentially infinite sequence. So finally, I've got 10 seconds to go. I think what makes a good math story, the short answer really is people like you, just doing good mathematics. And with that, I'll say thank you. And let's go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.